Welcome back again to the last session of the second day of the International Conference, Union of Wisdom and Method. Before we begin, although our chairperson, Venerable Geshe Changju Chödinla, is already introduced this morning, but for those who are coming after that, for those people, please allow me to read out the short biography. Former Abbot Venerable Geshe Changju Chödin was born in Himachal Pradesh in India. While in his early teens, he joined Gandhi Sharsi Monastic College in Mongut, Karnataka, and embarked on the extensive course of traditional Buddhist education. He was the topper in Geshe Haram exam of 1997, and consequently he was awarded the title of Geshe Haramba. Later he joined Goethe Tantric University and earned degree of Geshe Ngakrampa. Since 2000, he has been traveling extensive all around the world to teach Dharma on request. In middle of year 2009, His Holiness the Dalai Lama appointed him the abbot of prestigious Kandin Sharsi Monastic College, his alma mater. Since then, he leads the institute until this year, following his appointment as the secretary of Gandhi Tridokhang and executive director of Gelug International Foundation in 2017. He relinquished his abbotship and began to lead the international community of Gelugpas. With this, I request Venerable Geshe Changju Chödinla to proceed with the session.
Good afternoon, all the brothers and sisters, to this session after the tea break, and I do hope you are all kind of well refreshed with the tea and refreshments. Today we have these wonderful speakers here in front of me, actually inside of me, not in front of me. So I go from right to left. So first is Professor Mahesh Ji, Professor Mahesh A. Devkar. He's a professor and head of Department of Pali, Savitribai Pune University. His field of specialization include comparative grammars of Pali and Sanskrit, Theravada Buddhism, contemporary Buddhism translation and editing. He has published many works like Technical Terms and Technique of the Pali and Sanskrit Grammars, Central Institute of Higher Tibetan Studies, Sarnath Varnas 2008, and Vritmala Stuti, edited by late Michael Hahn, Shrikant S. Bahulkar, Lata Mahesh Devkar, Mahesh A. Devkar, Deshana, and Institute of Buddhist and Allied Studies, Pune, and Aditya Prakashan, New Delhi, 2016. So that is a kind of prestigious professor in extreme right of me. And then we have next, that is Professor S.R. Bhatt. Professor S.R. Bhatt is an eminent philosopher and Sanskritist. Presently, he is the chairman of Indian Council of Philosophical Research, Minister of Human Resource Development, Government of India. He is also chairman of Indian Philosophy Congress and Asian Philosophy Conference. He retired as a professor and head Department of Philosophy, University of Delhi. He is internationally known as an authority on ancient Indian culture, Buddhism, Jainism, and Vedanta. His research area include Indian philosophy, logic, epistemology, ethics, value theory, philosophy of education, philosophy of religion, comparative religion, social and political thought, etc. He has lectured in many universities and research institutes in various countries. He is also a member of Board of Advisors of Council for Research and Values and Philosophy, Washington, D.C., USA, which has brought out 300 volumes on world cultures and civilization. So, jumping down one paragraph, I would like to go to his final paragraph of his kind of short biography. His important publications are the Philosophy of Pancharatra, Studies in Ramanuja Vedanta, Knowledge, Values, Education, Buddhist Epistemology, and the Concepts of Atman and Paramatman in Indian Thought, Vedic Wisdom, Major Religions of the World, Applied Philosophy, Buddhist Thought, Culture in India and Korea, and Buddhist Thought and Culture in India and Japan, Glimpses of Buddhist Thought and Culture. So these are all edited by him, and so on. So these are, that is Professor S.R. Bhatt at my right side. And then to my extreme left is Mr. How do we read it? Sean? That's always give me problem, because as Indian we always read this as a scene. So that gives us a problem. That's this is the European and other languages. Sean Kerr is a teaching fellow in the School of Buddhist Studies, Nalanda University, and doctoral candidate in the Department of South and Southeast Asian Studies at UC Berkeley. His specialization is Pali literature. His research focuses on literary adaptation of doctrinal material as exemplified in the Pali Acharya Anuruddha's lesser-known Abhidharma treatises, and attempts to contextualize these with reference to one another, as well as wider commentarial corpus and South Indian locale of their productions. So now finally, we have at the left side of me, Venerable Dr. Tenzin Dadun, also known as Sonam Wangmo, was born in Tashi-Gang, Bhutan. Suma became a nun in 1993 and later received her Shramaneric, that is Gitsulma in Tibetan, ordination in 1999. Suma spent 13 years at Jamyang Choling Institute of Buddhist Dialectics in Dharamsala, Himachal Pradesh, India, studying Buddhist philosophy, Tibetan language and literature. Suma Tenzin holds Masters of Arts degree in Buddhist Studies from Delhi University, India in 2009, specializing in Tibetan Buddhism, and from the International Buddhist College, Thailand in 2016. Suma recently completed a Doctor of Philosophy degree in Gender and Religion at the University of Malaya, Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. Suma is also the first Himalayan Buddhist nun to obtain a PhD. Suma has taught at various Buddhist centers and has conducted guided meditation in Malaysia, Switzerland, and Germany. Suma has also taught the diploma course in Buddhist Studies, the Buddhist and Pali University under the Buddhist Missionary Society of Malaysia. Suma also conducts Tibetan language courses in Malaysia for the laity. Suma has long been an advocate of Buddhist women's issues, especially among female monastics in the Himalayan region since 1995. Suma has participated in 11 Shakyadita International Conferences for Buddhist women as presenter, translator, and moderator. Suma is fluent in English, Tibetan, Dzongkha, that is Bhutanese language, and Hindi, Nepali, and several Bhutanese dialects. Suma has written several articles aimed at invoking policy changes in terms of achieving equal access to monastic education and overall improvement of living conditions of nuns in Bhutan. Suma Dr. Tenzin Dadun's contribution to Buddhist women in Vajrayana Buddhism was recognized by the Association for the Promotion of Status of Women in Thailand, who honored her with the Outstanding Woman in Buddhism Award in Bangkok, Thailand on 2nd March 2012. So these are the kind of expert panelists today presenting their papers. Now, first of all, I move to the page here. The topic is Union of Wisdom and Method. See, it's really important to note this, the topic of union, the kind of union of wisdom and method. I think throughout the history, there has been a lot of ups and downs in India and in religious kind of arena. And at certain area, a certain time in certain period, there will be more focus on certain aspect of kind of practices, but they ignore other aspect of practices, and at the other time they focus on some other varieties of aspect of the practices, but then ignore another kind of part of the practice. Just look into the kind of movement of Bhakti tradition and movement of Gyan tradition in Hindu kind of religion, and the conflict between the Bhakti tradition and Gyan tradition. So how they kind of kind of debated against each other. So this has been going on. Even in Buddhism, that happens. In Tibet, there were a lot of such things that happened in past. Like from certain perspective, I'm not talking about from the wisdom and method aspect. Like at certain period of the history of Tibet, Tantra became so prevalent, and then due to the over kind of spreading and prevalence of the Tantra, the Sutra practices and the Vinaya practices were completely kind of undermined. And then when they tried to revive it, it was a big challenge for them. So that keeps going on. This is a kind of a characteristic of kind of human society. So it's really important to understand the the wholeness, the holy approach, the wholeness of the kind of practices. Unless if we just keep kind of how to say hanging on to one point, then we may miss a very important kind of part of the practice, and then we may not get where we target to go. So this is a very well chosen kind of a topic to address, though by making sure that I don't take too much of your time by kind of putting out all my junks. So let's give time to the our kind of respected speakers. I would like to call first. I would like to call. This is the complementary method of wisdom by Professor S.R. Bhatt. Yeah. So I would like to call Professor S.R. Bhatt to present your ideas and your views on this topic. Please carry on.
Honorable Chairperson, revered monks and nuns, and distinguished delegates. Before I touch upon the subject of this afternoon session, I would like to make one general remark. A distinction can be drawn between history of facts and history of ideas. If we look to history of facts, a distinction can be drawn between, say, Theravada and Mahayana. And there have been many stages of historical development in Buddhism. But if we take into account history of ideas, then I think this distinction gets obliterated, because all salient tenets, doctrines and practices of Mahayana are deeply rooted in Buddha Vachanas. And therefore they can be traced back to the Buddha Vachanas. And therefore Buddhism as such is one systematic whole within which you can talk of different facets. So I would therefore would not very much appreciate from philosophical point of view this distinction between Theravada and Mahayana. But that's apart. Buddhism is basically a mode of thinking and a way of living. The mode of thinking, as it is conceived and propounded by Lord Buddha, consists of a true awareness of the nature of reality, which culminates in prajna or sambodhi. And the way of living is the resultant conduct or charya or shila. Prajna and shila are two facets of the same situation, and therefore they can be distinguished but can't be separated. They go together. As regards prajna, Lord Buddha, on the basis of extensive study, deep reflections and profound meditation, realized the true nature of reality, which is generally captioned as anattavada, that there is nothing in the empirical world which is permanent, eternal, abiding. We do aspire things to be eternal and so forth, but this is our mithya drishti. So the realization of sambodhi is in the form of removal of mithya drishti. And accordingly, Buddha pointed out that all empirical phenomena are vitiated with finitude, non-permanence, and consequent suffering. So, sarvam dukkham is nothing but realization of the finitude and consequent suffering of the empirical world. For this, he further realized that all empirical phenomena have a dependent origination, and whatever has a dependent origination should also have an end. So we have dukkha samudaya and dukkha nirodha. These are two very important ideas or tenets which Buddha propounded. And on the basis of that, he advocated the doctrine of pratitya samutpada. Pratitya samutpada has two facets, udaya and nirodha. He argued that there is nothing in this world which has self-existence. Every iota of the cosmos has a dependent origination based on causal conditions. Given the causal conditions, you have the effect, and if you remove the causal conditions, the effect also gets removed. So, our ignorance about the nature of reality is also due to certain vitiating causal conditions. If you remove those causal conditions, well, there is a realization of enlightenment. This doctrine of Pratitya Samutpada has three stages in its development. One is technically known as idam pratyayata, the causal concatenation. Asmin sati idam bhavati, asmin no sati idam na bhavati. Well, this is the explanation of the cosmic process. I don't want to go into detail, already this has been discussed by the previous speaker. The second facet, which is a corollary thereof, has been propounded by Arya Nagarjuna in the form of Niswabhavata, essencelessness of all phenomena. Nothing in the cosmos has an authentic existence, an intrinsic existence. Nothing has swabhava, because every existence is a borrowed existence, borrowed from the preceding causal conditions, hetus and pratyayas. Of course, we have detailed analysis of 24 hetus and pratyayas. I don't want to go into the details. Nagarjuna made a clear distinction between two approaches to reality. Dve satye samashritya buddhanam dharma deshana. These are not two truths. I think this translation of satya as truth is misconceived. These are two approaches to the same reality. The same reality can be approached from empirical point of view, with the help of your conceptual categories or your empirical experiences, and it is known as samvriti. Samvriti is our approach to reality, our understanding of reality through our conceptual categories. Through our conceptual categories, we impose essence to the objects. And Dinaga, another very significant Buddhist thinker, pointed out that this imposition is kalpana. And 5 types of kalpana he has enumerated: dravya, guna, karma, nama and karma. Dravya, guna, karma, nama and jati, Nama and jati. Well, these are the categories conceptual categories which we impose upon reality. Whereas the reality is pure existence without any permanent essence. This is Nisvabhavata. This idea was further elaborated. Let me first develop this a little more. In Nagarjuna, we have two different approaches to shunyata. One is prapancha shunyata and the other is swabhava shunyata. The empirical phenomena do not have swabhava, and therefore they have swabhava shunyata. They don't have their own essence, they have borrowed existence. This is a swabhava shunyata or nisvabhavata. But the tattva, the real pure existence, is prapancha shunya, devoid of all impositions in the form of conceptual categories. So a clear distinction is to be drawn between swabhava shunyata and prapancha shunyata. This is how we have to understand dve satye shamasitya buddhanam dharma deshna. The reality is pure existence, which is only to be experienced. It can't be expressed, because all expressions are through conceptual categories and they are all impositions upon reality. Reality is not at all constituted by these conceptual categories. This idea was further elaborated by Chandrakirti in his Prasannapada. And he argued that all empirical phenomena have not only dependent existence, but also interdependent existence. Everything in the cosmos is interdependent in the sense that everyone is affected by anything that happens in anything else. Which means that in ultimate sense, everyone shares the same essence, Buddha Bhava, and therefore if anything is vitiating in one part of Buddha Bhava or Buddha Kshetra, well, it will affect the other also. Yeah. In other words, if we perform kushal karmas, well, it will not only affect the agent, but will also affect rest of the cosmos. If we perform akushal karmas, then it not only affects the agent, but also rest of the world. This is what has been the first two verses of Dhammapad also, where this idea has been elaborated. So, everything in this cosmos is mutually interdependent. Therefore, we have to perform good karmas only. And what are the guidelines of good karmas? For that, we have the four Brahma Viharas of Maitri, Karuna, Mudita, and Upeksha. There is since everyone shares the same Buddha Bhava, everyone is part and parcel of the same Buddha Kshetra. Buddha Kshetra is the whole, and all of us are parts within that whole. That idea for whole and parts also is very much available to us. And just 1 minute more. And therefore, we have to see to it that we have friendship with all. Shantidev has used two very catchy words, Paratma Samata and Paratma Parivartana in Bodhicharya Avatar, that we have to feel one with the others, one with the rest, Paratma Samata. And not only that, we have to transform ourselves as the rest. This is what is known as mudita also, to rejoice in the well-being of others and to be melancholy if others are unhappy. This ideal of bodhisattva is nothing but expression of this feeling of Paratma Samata and Paratma Parivartana. So, if we talk of Pragya, then it is Patita Samutpada, which gives us the guidance for that. If we talk of Shila or practices, because practices can be of different types, but I am talking of only practices in terms of modes of living. And there, Shila, this Brahma Viharas, are helpful to us. So there is a symbiosis of Pragya and Shila in Buddhist thought and culture. Thank you very much. I am grateful to Geshe Namdulji for giving me this opportunity to share some of my stray thoughts with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor S.R. Bhattji, to put your ideas in such a kind of a short period with being so eloquent. Now I would like to call Professor Mahesh Devkarji to address complementarity of method and wisdom in Theravada. So please carry on from there. Yeah,
thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you very much. Since the time is actually Prajnapti in Theravada tradition, but since here it is a Paramartha in the conference, so I'll stick to it. And without wasting much time, with the permission of chair, of course, I would like to request for two conditions. One is my wife; she will be reading the text, and my colleague Ujjwal. Okay, so and to kind of to display the PowerPoint. Yeah, thank you.
Over there. Yeah.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. The topic of today's presentation is complementarity of method and wisdom. And the first point is, what is a path? How is it complementary to the goal and the wisdom? While explaining the word Magga from the point of etymology, Buddhaghosa says, it is called path since it looks for, that is, searches for liberation, or it goes on killing defilements, hence it is called a path. Both these etymological definitions underline the fact that the path and its goal must be in conformity. Otherwise, path cannot be called a path. In other words, a path is always complementary to the wisdom it aims to achieve. If we analyze the above two definitions, we can point out two aspects of the complementarity of the path. The first is that it is complementary by way of removing obstacles to liberation, and the second is that it serves as a condition for liberation, or in other words, leads a person out of samsara by inculcating in a particular qualities that are conducive to liberation. The Buddha's teachings as summarized in the Dhammapada cover both these aspects. It reads, not doing any evil, acquiring what is meritorious, and purification of one's own mind is the teaching of the awakened ones. Here, Buddha's teaching, which is the path to liberation, is said to first help a practitioner to get rid of evil states within him and then by cultivating wholesome states helps him to purify his mind completely. If one picks up any of the Buddha's teachings, one can clearly see these two aspects of the path reflected in it. In a number of suttas, we find that the Buddha criticized other teachers for propounding such paths which either have no clear goal or lead to undesirable consequences. For example, in the Tevijja Sutta of the Digha Nikaya, the Buddha ridiculed the two Brahmin teachers, Pokharasati and Tarukha, who, despite of being ignorant of the exact whereabouts of Brahma, were teaching the path leading to union with him, and moreover were claiming that path to be the only one and the best. Similarly, the Buddha pointed out to the Niganthas how they were practicing severe austerities for getting rid of those sins of the past lives about which they knew nothing. The Buddha also showed to Brahmins that unethical practices such as animal sacrifices cannot win them the final release from the samsara, for killing etc. are not in conformity with the goal of liberation. On the contrary, such acts would result in bad consequences for themselves and others. Not only the Buddha but also his disciples like the nun named Punnika educated people about the apparent contradictions between their religious practice and the goal. On all the above mentioned occasions, the Buddha's advice to the on all the above mentioned occasions, the Buddha's advice to the concerned people was first to differentiate between the right and the wrong path and to then choose the one which is complementary to their said goal. In the Tevijja Sutta, he told the Brahmins Vasetha and Bharadwaja that if anyone wants to be in the company of Brahma, then instead of the qualities that are contrary to the nature of Brahma, one should cultivate those which agree with it. Similarly, in the Kutadanta Sutta of the Digha Nikaya, the Buddha suggested to the Brahmins to replace unethical bloody animal sacrifices with a moral one in the form of complete mental purification. In the Sundarika Bharadwaja Sutta of the Sutta Nipata, the Buddha said to the Brahmin Bharadwaja that in order to get the highest benefit of the sacrifice, he should offer the sacrificial cake to the most worthy person instead of offering it to someone who is merely a Brahmin by birth. In the Therigatha, Punnika too asked the Brahmin first to give up all the evil actions which cause dreadful and unpleasant suffering and then to follow the path taught by the Buddha. The Buddha mentioned on several occasions that the only thing which he taught was the suffering and the freedom from it. He did not teach anything that was not complementary to his goal. In the Chula Malunke Sutta of the Majjhima Nikaya, the Buddha refused to answer those questions of metaphysical nature asked by Malunkya, which did not concern either the problem of suffering or its solution. He rather warned him of the futility of such metaphysical inquiry, as it is not conducive either to spiritual practice or to liberation. The same attitude of the Buddha can be observed in the Simsapavana Sutta of the Anguttara Nikaya, where he told Ananda that even though he had vast knowledge, he taught to people only those things which lead to the freedom from suffering. The Buddha's wisdom comprises the complete understanding of suffering, its cause, its cessation, and the path leading to that cessation. It is well known as the Four Noble Truths, which he preached in Sarnath in his first discourse to the group of 5 ascetics. The Buddha did not get this wisdom as some kind of divine revelation. It rather resulted from his meditative practice and contemplation. When the Buddha reflected on the nature of suffering and its source, he discovered the law of dependent origination or interdependent coexistence. He realized that the suffering results from craving, pride, and wrong view, which are further caused by ignorance. In other words, he discovered that the human suffering is rooted in unwise emotional responses and wrong comprehension of reality, and if these conditions could be corrected, one can get rid of it. Once this truth was discovered, the Buddha devised a program for the systematic removal of craving and ignorance and then preached it to masses. Sometimes this program was preached in the form of Eightfold Noble Path, sometimes as the Threefold Training, sometimes as Fivefold Investigation, sometimes as Sevenfold Purification, and some other times as states on the side of enlightenment, which comprise Fourfold Right Effort, 4 Foundations of Mindfulness, 4 Constituents of Psychic Power, 5 Spiritual Faculties, 5 Spiritual Powers, 7 Factors of Enlightenment, the practice of serenity and insight, along with the Eightfold Path. When one closely examines the nature of craving, it becomes clear that craving is an unwise emotional response having 2 aspects, that of a longing and aversion. These 2 are respectively governed by desirable and undesirable feelings, which one gets when he comes in contact with sense objects. Pride, or more precisely, self-estimation and wrong view, are mistaken ideas about self and reality. Of them, the former is a result of a false perception, whereas the latter is a product of a deluded thought process. These emotional responses are founded on 3 root conditions, namely greed, hatred, and delusion, which are generally referred to as roots of evil actions. These root conditions are so called because the emotional responses mentioned above and their outward manifestation in the form of physical and verbal unmoral actions are rooted in them. According to the Abhidhamma, craving, self-estimation, and wrong view result from the combination of 2 conditions, namely greed and delusion, or hatred and delusion. Longing and aversion clearly have an element of greed and hatred. However, deep within these are bound to the notion of self or I. Both longing and aversion find their expression in the attitude, "This is mine." I long for something because it pleases myself. I avert something because it does not please me. The self-estimation and wrong view have an element of greed, for these are obsessions of oneself and one's views respectively. However, these 2 clearly entail a connection with the notion of self. This am I is the expression of pride, which emerges from a solidified image of oneself. Similarly, this is myself is the manifestation of wrong view in the ultimate sense. Building an idea of self based on this or that aspect of our personality is the highest wrong view, which provides foundation to all the subsequent wrong views. The Buddha pointed out that the notion of self is a result of lack of knowledge of the true nature of reality. This reality is not of mystic or metaphysical nature. It is rather the commonly comprehensible reality of our worldly existence. From the Buddhist point of view, our worldly existence has 3 characteristics, namely impermanence, suffering, and non-self. When one is ignorant about this reality, he has a mistaken comprehension of the same due to the working of the mental factor of perception. He perceives what is not beautiful as beautiful, what is suffering as happiness, what is impermanent as permanent, and what is non-self as self. This wrong perception then leads to further escalation in the form of string of undesirable responses. In short, erroneous cognition, that is ignorance, is at the root of all the defilements. The Buddha classified defilements into 3 levels based on the way they operate. These are: first, the gross level of immoral habitual tendencies, or the level of defilements causing physical or verbal moral transgression. Second, the subtle level of unwise reactionary emotional responses or occasionally flaring defilements. And the third is the subtlest level of latent negative potentials or dormant defilements. So according to the Visuddhimagga, the threefold training into higher morality, higher concentration, and higher wisdom is for the purpose of eradication of the 3 respective defilements mentioned above. The training in higher morality helps to remove gross defilements partially by way of replacing immoral behavior with moral one. The training in higher concentration is useful in temporarily getting rid of subtle defilements by way of suspending unwholesome mental states through single pointedness of mind, whereas the training in higher wisdom is most effective in permanently uprooting the subtlest defilements by way of completely cutting off the latent immoral tendencies through thorough scrutiny of the nature of reality. The Noble Eightfold Path comprises these threefold trainings and is therefore a complete program for the destruction of craving. Here, the complementarity of the path can be understood from its effectiveness in tackling defilements of different nature and at different levels. The variety of methods such as the conscious change in old habits, focusing of mind on a single object, and investigation into the nature of reality adopted for overcoming the said defilements is also important in this connection. The method of fivefold investigation.
Personality and purpose.
Sorry.
Conclusion, you can make it conclusion.
Okay.
It's okay. I think you can.
Personality, capacity, and attitude. The Buddha is said to have preached the Dhamma taking into consideration the disposition, the intention, the personality, and the inclination of a person. For example, the practice of 4 Satipatthanas was taught taking these factors into consideration. It has been said in the Sumangala Vilasini that the Buddha has preached exactly 4 foundations of mindfulness in order to benefit different types of practitioners. An eminent foundation of mindfulness, namely insight observation of body, has been prescribed for a dull practitioner of craving disposition, adopting the method of concentration meditation. A subtle foundation of mindfulness, namely insight observation of feelings, has been prescribed for a sharp-minded practitioner of craving disposition, adopting the method of concentration meditation. A foundation of mindfulness, namely insight observation of mind with limited categories, has been prescribed for a dull practitioner of obsessed disposition, adopting the method of insight meditation. A foundation of mindfulness, namely the insight observation of phenomena with numerous categories, has been prescribed for a sharp-minded practitioner of obsessed disposition, adopting the method of insight meditation.
Last level.
The Buddha and his disciples appealed to the capacity of reasoning and self-judgment of people in the matter of examining the correctness and the efficacy of the path they have undertaken. The Buddha has given a number of parameters to judge the complementarity of the path to its goal. It is important to note that these parameters are also applicable to his teachings. In the Bhikkhuni Khandaka of the Mahavagga of the Vinay Pitaka, responding to the request of Mahapajapati Gotami to explain in brief what is Dhamma and what is not, the Buddha gave a simple test for distinguishing one from the other. And you can read out the passage. Similarly, in the Kalama Sutta of the Anguttara Nikaya, while guiding Kalamas of Kesaputta on how to distinguish between right and wrong paths, the Buddha asked them to introspect and decide the matter for themselves. The third important discourse in this connection is the Vimamsaka Sutta of the Majjhima Nikaya. Here the Buddha very openly advised people to constantly examine their teacher and his teaching. During this examination, it is important to check by means reasoning and one's own experience gained through sincere practice the compatibility of the teaching and the goal it claims to achieve. This particular ability to distinguish between the path and non-path is referred to in the Rathavinita Sutta of the Majjhima Nikaya as the purity concerning the right and the wrong path. It is explained in the Visuddhimagga. This is a path, this is not a path. The knowledge established after knowing the path and a non-path in this way is called the purity of knowledge and insight regarding a path and a non-path. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Professor Mahesh Deokarji and Mrs. Deokar. So, thank you very much for your presentation. It's a very, very elaborate and informative paper. Now, I would like to call Venerable Dr. Tenzin Dadun to shed some light on Heart Sutra and Shunyata. And this is a kind of very, very relevant topic when we are dealing with this ultimate reality. So I request you to begin now. Thank you.
Very good afternoon. Very good afternoon and Tashdili to all the very good distinguished speakers.
Take this away. Yeah.
Very good afternoon, Tashidile, to all the Venerable Bhikkhu Sanghas, distinguished speakers, brothers and sisters. Thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to be here to speak in front of you all. I especially thank Geshe Dorji Damdula and the Tibet House, the organizer for this conference, for giving me an opportunity to speak on the Heart Sutra and Shunyata. So the topic of my paper is the heart of understanding and exposition of the doctrinal and practical aspect of Shunyata in the Heart Sutra. So generally speaking, Indian philosophy is divided into two main currents: the Atma doctrine of the Upanishads and the Anatma doctrine of Buddhism. The Madhyamika system founded by Arya Nagarjuna is the middle path, which neither leans towards eternalism, which is substance or soul, nor the other extreme nihilism, denial of continuity. The Madhyamika philosophy is synonymous with the doctrine of emptiness and the doctrine of the non-self-existence. In the Mul Madhyamaka Karika of Nagarjuna, T.J. Kalupahana contends that Madhyamika is not a new invention, but an elaboration of the Shunyata concept from the Pali canon, with particular emphasis on the Kaccayanagotta Sutta. Early Buddhism denied the reality of the substance soul, but dogmatically affirmed the reality of the dharmas, separate elements. Madhyamika goes a step further by not only denying the reality of substance soul, but to the elements too, hence the emphasis on Shunyata. So to give a brief introduction. So to give a brief introduction on the Heart Sutra, or in Sanskrit is known as Prajnaparamata Hridaya, is a very popular sutra in Mahayana Buddhism. It has been chanted in every monasteries, like in the Tibetan monasteries, Japanese, Korean, Chinese, even in Vietnamese. The Heart Sutra belongs to the perfection of wisdom category of Mahayana Buddhism literature, like the famous Diamond Sutra, which in Sanskrit is called Vajracharika Sutra. The Heart Sutra is made of 14 slokas in Sanskrit, or runs to a little over 1 page, and forms the heart of the Prajnaparamita literature. Hence, its name was given the Heart Sutra, the essence. It is extremely appealing to the masses due to its length and the essence of the teaching on the concept of Shunyata, as it is very convenient because of the length, which is very short, as earlier mentioned, just about a page. And then the historical development disputes of origin and authenticity of the text. The Khonds distinguished 4 phases in the development of the Prajnaparamita literature. The Heart Sutra belongs to the 3rd period. The Khonds also dates this sutra's origin to around 350 CE, while Lopez dates the origin to the 2nd century CE. The earliest known version of the Heart Sutra is a Chinese translation by Qi Qian, a Central Asian monk between 200 and 250 CE, followed by Kumarajiva around 400 CE. But nonetheless, it did not gain popularity until about 1,000 years after the historical Buddha's passing away. So the fame of the Heart Sutra as a powerful protection against evil forces and calamities became known when Xuanzang returned to China in 645 CE, which is after his journey to the west. So before that, it was not popular at all. And then Xuanzang also translated the Heart Sutra from Sanskrit into Chinese in 649 CE. From the Mahayana perspective, especially in the Tibetan tradition, the origin of the Heart Sutra, like any other Mahayana discourse in the Kanjur, is attributed to the historical Buddha. And then there are 3 non-debates in modern scholarships about the origin of the Heart Sutra. Number 1, Arya Nagarjuna asserted in his Mahaprajnaparamita Shastra that the Prajnaparamita scriptures originated in South India, transmitted through northern India to Central Asia, along the Silk Road, and finally into China during the Kushan Empire, which dates to the 1st and 2nd century CEs. And then second, the Heart Sutra was composed within the Kushan Empire, which dates again to the 2nd century CE. And then the third debate is about the Heart Sutra, which is originated in China, according to the Jain Nature of 1992 articles. The Tibetan version of the Heart Sutra in relation to the root text, the Tibetan version of Heart Sutra was translated from Sanskrit by Indian Dzogchen Pandita Vimala Mitra with Lotsawa Rinchen Day around 8th century CE. There are about at least 21 extant versions of the Heart Sutra, like 12 in Nepali language, 7 in Chinese, 2 in Japanese, and in addition to that we have 2 Tibetan versions, which are from the Kanjur, the Tibetan canonical text, and also from the fresco in the Gregi Chemaling at the Samye temple in Tibet, which is dated between 755 and 800 CE. The 17th Karmapa mentions that there are no significant differences between the 2 translations of the Tibetan Heart Sutra text, either from the Kanjur and the frescoes. Also, there is a general agreement between Kumarajiva's and Vimala Mitra's translation, which leads support to the general view in Tibetan Buddhism that the Tibetan version of the Heart Sutra represents a very early, unadulterated transmissions. The commentaries in Sanskrit and Tibetans. The Tibetan canon preserves the text of 7 Indian commentaries on the Heart Sutra, attributed to the authors like Vimala Mitra, Jnana Mitra, Vajrapani, Prashastra Sena, Kamalashla, Dipamkara Srijana, most commonly known as Atisha, and Sri Mahajana. These 7 commentaries in Sanskrit are believed to have been written between the middle of 8th century and the middle of 11th century, a period that encompasses both of the diffusions of the Dharma into Tibet. There is an additional or 8th commentary, which is of esoteric Dzogchen by Sri Singha, presumably referring to one of the earliest Dzogchen masters of either Central Asian, it's a Khotan or Kinori origin, who lived sometimes in the 8th century CE. Also, there are 4 non-Tibetan commentaries of the Heart Sutra by the Gungtang Tempe Dröme, and then also by Jamyangye Lodre, Ngawang Tender, and Taranatha. The Heart Sutra actually revolves around the doctrine of Shunyata, which was propounded by Arya Nagarjuna, the proponent of the Madhyamika school of Buddhism. The Nagarjuna further developed the concept of Shunyata from key early Buddhist doctrines, particularly Anyatya, non-self, and Pratitya Samutpad, dependent origination. The Shunyata that we are talking about since morning is actually can be summarized as all dharmas, all conditioned things including self and phenomena that are empty of inherent existence and arise depending on causes and conditions. Emptiness is synonymous with the interdependence of things because everything that exists is conditioned and cannot exist on its own without depending on causes and conditions, without depending on other factors. Emptiness is also synonymous with the middle way, as the very understanding of emptiness allows us to transcend dualities and extremes such as existence and non-existence. According to Nagarjuna, without relying on the conventional truth, the ultimate truth is not taught, and without arriving at the ultimate truth, nirvana is not achieved. These words demonstrate the complementary and necessary relationships between the true truth. So we cannot live without one another. So as in the morning session, they were explaining about the dependent originator from Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh and all. So it is all interdependent. The Madhyamika philosophy demonstrates that the distinction between samsara and nirvana is relative. That is, the notion of samsara and nirvana are but one's own perception, and that there is no concretely existing distinctions, space, or concept as samsara or nirvana in themselves. The title and context of the Heart Sutra. The Sanskrit title as contained in the Tibetan Heart Sutra reads Bhagavati Prajnaparamita Hridaya Sutra. So Jigten Khandu Rinpoche explains because the term Bhagavati has a very strong connotation of goddess or mother principle, which is Prajnaparamita, is often referred to as the mother of all Buddhas. And the Prajnaparamita is the mother of all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas because of the two reasons. Number one, she is ground of all realization, that is emptiness itself. And she is also the wisdom that realizes emptiness. In Sanskrit, it's prajna, and Tibetan sherab, of self and phenomena. Prajnaparamita means wisdom gone beyond the realm of conventional reality. The term Hridaya indicates the essence or the summary or the main contents. In Tibetan, the sutra is known as Sherab Nyingpo. Sherab means wisdom and Nyingpo means essence, with Nyingpo describing the text as an essence of wisdom. To quote Janamitra, regarding Hridaya, there is nothing profound or sublime in the perfection of wisdom in 100,000 lines that is not contained in the small sutra. So the 1,000 words is being condensed into the very one page. So the general outline of the sutra. The Heart Sutra is believed to follow the same sequence of categories used by the Sarvastivadins in texts such as Samyukta Agama, the content of which the Heart Sutra seeks to negate. So Avalokiteshvara turns from the Sarvastivadin interpretation of the Abhidharma to the emptiness of Prajnaparamita, which provides travelers with all they need to reach the goal of Buddhahood. And then in the end, Avalokiteshvara leaves us with a summary of the teaching of Prajnaparamita in the form of an incantation that reminds and empowers us to go beyond all conceptual categories. To give a specific outline of the sutra, I have adopted a Janamitra 7-point outline to elucidate the doctrinal aspects. These are the setting of the stages or the preambles, like giving an example of excellent time, excellent place, teachers and disciples. And the entry into wisdom, the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara was perfectly at the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom. He was also meditating on the perfection of wisdom when the Buddha was remaining silent throughout the discourses. The characteristics of emptiness, it is the perspective of training on the 5 Mahayana path. And then the object or field of experience of emptiness, it refers to the wisdom realizing emptiness, and it focuses on the way or to attain the path of no more learning. And the benefit and or qualities of the wisdom of the sutra is that one ceases to have any fear of samsara or nirvana and has ceased all form of grasping, which is at the true existence that we see. The fruit of wisdom, it is based on 5 paths. Based on 5 paths, one attains full enlightenment and need no further learning. And the mantra of the wisdom is Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhiswaha, which is in English is go beyond, go utterly beyond the perfection towards Buddhahood. So the conclusion of the section of the root text of the Heart Sutra. In Janamitra's commentary, it concludes at the mantra, whereas in the Tibetan version, the Vimalamitra elucidated 3 additional categories in the concluding section of the sutras after the mantra. So the number 1 is clearing doubt through affirming words of rejoicing. As the Buddha said, then the Bhagavan arose from the concentration, and so on. And then also to clarifying the words that were spoken by the Buddha in the sutra. Well said, and so on. And then also the concluding praises also by the Bhagavan that spoke. And it is only at this juncture that the Buddha breaks silence in the entire discourse to affirm what the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara has expounded as authentic in the form of the praise to which the multitude of beings gathered at Vulture's Peak rejoiced. So that the practical aspect of the Heart Sutra, the Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh explained the Heart Sutra in a most beautiful way to make it relevant to the daily lives of Buddhist practitioners. If we are not able to use the teachings to be liberated from suffering, the teachings themselves become an accumulation exercise, an end by itself and not the means to an end, which it is happening with many of us. The core message of the Heart Sutra is all phenomena are empty of separate self. In the Sutra of the 4 Foundations of Mindful, the Buddha also recommended that we observe the following in the penetrating way, that our body in the body, the feelings in the feelings, the mental formations in the mental formations, and the mind in the mind, and etc. Therefore, if we observe deeply the reverse of form, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness, we will be able to see the empty nature of all of them and suddenly overcome all pains. And when one overcomes all pain, only when one is able to penetrate, that is, be one with the object of meditations. In conclusion, this paper provided an overview of the historical development, doctrinal and practical aspects of the essence of all the perfection of Wisdom Sutra. This sutra contains the entire 5 Mahayana paths and 10 Bodhisattva labels, has the great power to purify afflictive and cognitive obscurations and also actualize the full enlightenment. I hereby summarize the entire Heart Sutra by quoting the words of Guru Padmasambhava in his advice to his disciple Yeshe Tsogil on how to practice the Dharma authentically to ensure that one's meditation and Dharma understanding is beyond fabrication of true existence. So it quotes, "Do not do anything, do not follow, do not think, do not conceptualize, do not articulate or express anything, do not do anything, with nothing to see, nothing to follow, nothing to abide in, simply let be." So with that, I thank you, and thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Venerable Dr. Tenzin Dadun for such an elucidating presentation on the Heart Sutra. Very impressive. Now I would like to call Our next speaker, Mr. Sean Kerr, to shed light on 10 recollections. So,
okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My thanks to the conference organizers for extending the invitation. I've been asked to speak to you today about the 10 recollections, which have an especially nice presentation in one of these unpopular works of the champion of Theravada, Anuruddha. So Anuruddha is very well known for his classic systematization of the topics of the Abhidhamma, the Abhidhammatta Sangaha, that everybody knows, but much less known for some reason are his other works, the Nama-Rupa Paricheda and Paramatta Vinichaya, which rework and expand upon this material. The Nama-Rupa Paricheda in particular stands out for its vivid depictions of patipatti, practice, and its rich evocations of prototypical meditative progress in a Theravada context. So fully half the Nama-Rupa Paricheda is dedicated to the treatment of patipatti, about 1,000 verses, which follow the Visuddhimagga closely in terms of content. They're innovations, mainly ones of form and presentation. As a literary rendition of the Mahavihara doctrinal material, the text stands out mainly for aesthetic criteria, its images, depictions, beauty, and skillfully deployed similes. We can infer that very much in the tradition of the Theravada Abhidhamma, it must have sprung from an intellectual climate in which orthodoxy was highly prized, where innovation in content being frowned upon, innovation in form was sort of the only thing that was permissible. And yet, in some cases, alteration of form can imbue whole structures with new and fresh significance. So such is the case, as we'll see, with Anuruddha's treatment of the 10 recollections. In the suttas, the first 6 recollections occur frequently as a unit. Recollection of the qualities of the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, of one's own virtue and adherence to precepts, of one's prior acts of magnanimous giving, of one's possession in full measure of the same qualities that earned the deities their divine rebirth. Reflection on these is found prescribed as a means of uplifting the mind and giving rise to joy and pleasure that pave the way to meditative progress. When these 6 recollections occur as part of a longer series in the suttas, they're followed by the awareness of respiration, of the inevitability of death, of the body, particularly as an assemblage of parts, and lastly, the recollection of Nibbana as the ultimate peace. The Visuddhimagga, in its latter-day systematization of the Dasa Anusatiyo, the 10 recollections, as a set of 10 objects within a larger set of 40 meditation subjects that can serve as objects of concentration, rearranges the last 4 in the series in its exposition of them, so that the 6 recollections are followed by the recollections of death. Sorry, I just noticed I only have the Pali up there for you, but by the recollections of death, body, breath, and lastly, peace. So taking this treatment as his point of departure, we can see that Anuruddha makes a further adjustment, tacking on the recollection of peace to the initial set of 6, thus treating this now as a group of 7, and following it with death, body, and lastly, breath. So we can ask to what end these lists are being rearranged, and especially what logic it is that informs Anuruddha's final arrangement. For this, I'll turn to Anuruddha's treatment of the recollections one by one, seeking not only to exemplify the recollections in their classical form via Anuruddha's skillful evocation of them, but also the uniqueness of his presentation vis-à-vis other versions. So Anuruddha's text delights in setting up vivid first-person subjective spaces in which the unfolding of insight can be modeled stage by stage. This characteristic renders its depictions of practice very direct and personal. There's additionally a poetic sensibility that governs his selection of elements from the pool of commentarial material. So the elements that he singles out for highlighting are carefully chosen and recast the sort of encyclopedic content of the Visuddhimagga into a more selectively framed and carefully chosen presentation of artistic merit. His recollection of the Buddha, therefore, includes the standard elements of the Itipiso Bhagava formula, but passes through these swiftly to detain itself on the more dramatic image of the Buddha as the Dhammaraja, who, like the moon, cleansed of its blemish, with its retinue of stars, shines with his vassal king Sangha in array, resplendent like a universal king. The Dhamma is not only Swakato, but a Dhammarato, a chariot of Dhamma that moves towards the attainment of one's effort's consummation. In his recollection of the Sangha, the martial theme again predominates. The Sangha is a fearless assembly that is armed with samadhi, flashes in battle with the weapon of panya. It's the assembly of those who have stayed their course and scattered Mara's army, their battle won, their valor graceful and mighty. It's also, of course, the pure and faultless field in which the well-placed seed of faith can ripen into the highest fruit of attainment. Sorry. Okay. And Anuruddha advises him who would like that seed to ripen into the attainment to pursue this recollection. This set of 3 is extended to a set of 6 with the addition of the recollections of virtue, sacrifice, and likeness to deities. In Anuruddha's recollection of Sila, whether one observes 5, 8, 10, or 227 precepts, one is advised to reflect upon the advantages of one's adherence to these. Sila is prayed as the root and source of progress on the path, the entryway to the Buddha's dispensation. In the recollection of sacrifice, chaga, or synonym for giving, we gain a first clue as to Anuruddha's recasting of the 10 recollections into a coherent, sequential, and cumulative series. The recollection begins, having given dana to those with sila, as is fitting, out of faith, and advises reflection upon such magnanimous acts of sacrifice and the benefits that accrue from them. The sequence adds an element of order to the qualities we've so far considered and renders a cumulus series, beginning with saddha and progressing to sila and dana. In case the specific association of giving to the virtuous and its motivation in faith is doubted, this is re-emphasized a few verses later, okay, with this verse, and one in whom the virtuous find support, etc. Okay. Okay. So with the recollection of the deities, qualities of learning and wisdom are added to the existing series of saddha, sila, and chaga. These 5 are collectively referred to as the Deva Dhamma, understood as qualities that lead to heavenly rebirth. One is directed to reflect on one's possession of these same qualities in equal measure as the deities who acquired their long and glorious lives upon rebirth as a result of them. Sorry. In ascending hierarchy, whether the deities of the 6 increasingly exalted Deva worlds or the Brahma worlds above them, one's possession of them in equal measure and by extension karmic equality with them is recalled. Okay. We may pause at this point to make some observations about the series so far. We can note first that the ascending series of good qualities we witness has implications for the relationship that governs the recollections. The anusatis have been imbued with a cumulative nature, one leading on to the other. Okay, so this is part of the uniqueness of Anuruddha's presentation, that these are woven into coherent, sort of gradual, progressive practice that then can be modeled as a sequence. Second, we may notice that there is perhaps a similarly ascending cosmological principle at work in the ordering the qualities. So with the cultivation of Saddha and the three jewels, the path to the karmically higher attainments is opened. With the cultivation of Sila and Dana, the lower worlds are closed off and heaven worlds are attained. And with the cultivation of the Deva Dhamma, soteriological equality with these successively higher orders of beings inhabiting the Deva worlds is highlighted. So each Anusati relates to a higher cosmological order. Third, we may note that till now we're largely in a lay-oriented religious framework, privileging the Lokya or mundane religious goals of the accumulation of merit and good rebirth via faith and good conduct, rather than the world-transcending goals of higher meditative states, leading to liberation from rebirth altogether. Okay. I'm going to skip a little. The lay context of the practices is readily apparent. In the Chaga recollection, the sutta evokes an explicitly lay context. I live in a household with a mind devoid of the taint of selfishness. This is in the sutta presentation of that. This is echoed in Anuruddha's characterization of the practitioner as a supporter of kin and friends, which clearly evokes a lay context. The purpose of these recollections, according to the sutta account, is to initiate the same chain of cause and effect frequently associated with the abandoning of the 5 hindrances, leading to the attainment of concentration via the subsiding of the major defilements during the recollection, and the consequent inspiration, joy, and pleasure resulting from it. Okay, a sequence that's apparently related to the emergence of the Bojjhangas. So, recollecting the Buddha, this is that sequence in its sutta versions. Craving and aversion subside, the mind acquires inspiration and gladness. Gladdened joy arises. The body of one whose mind is filled with joy becomes tranquil. One with tranquil body feels pleasure, and the mind of one feeling pleasure becomes concentrated. So, freeing the mind from the hold of craving, aversion, and delusion, and inspiring inspiration and gladness, they thus pertain to the initial stages of that chain. One further point about context in the sutta account becomes clear. Being recommended for the use of an Arya Savako, noble disciple, characterized as one who has entered the stream of the Dhamma. In these suttas, the practices are recommended for the use in the wake of accomplishment. In the Visuddhimagga, this is qualified though. They're earmarked as specifically for the accomplished, for their full depth of attainment, but additionally as of use to the beginner by way of second-hand knowledge. In the Namarupa Paricheda, however, they're somewhat remarkably represented in contrast to both the suttas and the Visuddhimagga as exclusively with reference to the unaccomplished beginner. Okay, so this supports our impression that it is Anuruddha's intention to weave the 10 recollections into a single cumulative and sequential practice to create a graded ascending sequence that can be modeled in a linear progression through the text literary evocation of it. So Anuruddha wants us to be able to watch the practice unfold as we read, and in our reading, get a taste of it. So 3 more minutes, is that? 2, okay. Yeah. Okay, so the last 4 recollections are the site of the greatest diversion. I'm going to skip over the recollection of peace, only mentioning that it likewise is downgraded and used as a sort of transitional mechanism between these aspirations to Lokya and Lokuttara, mundane and transcendental attainments. Okay, so with the recollection of death, the first insight characteristic of impermanence is brought into vivid relief. All classes of beings are racked with Okay, let's skip over the recollection of death as well. Suffice it to say that the recollection of death is related to insight and represents a sort of initial sprouting of the appreciation of the characteristic of impermanence in the way it's represented in Anuruddha. Okay, now this, for Anuruddha, in some sense, it would appear, is where the real practice and real progress on the path actually begins. Okay, so this is significant. Anuruddha informs us that by way of his cultivation to present, the practitioner has become endowed with diligence and disenchantment, and is concentrated with access concentration. Taking up the cultivation of bodily awareness, he becomes enabled now to do away with craving and attain the deathless. Okay, in Anuruddha's exposition of the practice, the Theravada's position on Panya's relationship to practice is very lucidly stated, and somewhat uniquely. The text refers to Kayagata Sati's bodily awareness's threefold division when practiced on the basis of the 32 parts. And I think I'll end with this example which captures the principle I wanted to show. He says, if the practice takes place on the basis of the body parts, not lovely aspect, then the meditation subject is repulsiveness and may lead to the first jhana. If it takes place on the basis of the color of the part, blue or so on, when the counterpart sign arises, then becoming the blue kasina or so on, it would become conductive to the 5 jhanas. If the recollection proceeds on the basis of the 3 characteristics, it becomes a vipassana meditation subject, so say the wise. Okay, so this is a treatment of Kayagata Sati is especially clear, delineating as it does a progression of the development from repulsiveness to concentration to insight, which it uniquely characterizes as the practice's threefold division. Okay, so Anuruddha has a similar rubric with which he considers Anapana, considering it in 8 aspects, the latter 4 of which are related explicitly to insight stages. He takes us through the 16 stages of the Anapanasati Sutta, which he relates interestingly explicitly to an insight context, the latter 4 stages of his rubric. So in this way, Anapana becomes a site for an extensive treatment of the development of wisdom as an alternative methodology of meditative practice on the basis of the same meditation subjects that are used as samatha objects. So like Kayagata Sati, Anuruddha's treatment depicts the ultimate Theravada position on the relational nature of wisdom. It takes place on the basis of the same objects of concentration, but consists in a different way of looking at them. It's subsequent and optional, but in some sense also where the real patipatti begins. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sean, for your wonderful presentation. Now we have a little bit of time to take questions. So we take 2 questions, only 2. So I hope I don't need to organize to have a kind of how to say a lottery system. Maybe many of you may have a lot of wonderful questions, but unfortunately due to the time constraint, we have to put down the numbers to only 2. So whenever you ask question, please be brief and to the point. Please don't keep moving around and taking all the time, okay? So be brief and to the point. The lady over there, please come up with your question. I have another 1 question after this, okay? So I have the professor here, then that's it.
So my question is for Professor Bhatt. Please, if you could, you spoke about, instead of the translation as 2 truths, to use 2 approaches to the same reality. And please, if you could philosophically or in terms of even implications on practice, speak about this a little bit more.
these two approaches are both from theoretical as well as practical points of view. Theoretically, two approaches means a distinction between the conceptual reality and real reality. The reality as it is conceived by us and the reality as it is in itself. So Paramartha and Samvriti are two different understandings of the same reality from theoretical point of view. From practical point of view, in Samvriti, we have to have such a conduct which is conducive to total well-being. And therefore, Maitri, Karuna, Mudita and Upeksha are to be practiced at the Samvartik level. At the Paramarthic level, well, we have just to keep quiet and just have pure experience in the state of Samadhi. So, from the worldly point of view, you have one type of conduct. From transcendental point of view, you have another type of conduct. So, these two approaches are both theoretical as well as practical.
Okay, done. So, next question, Professor, please, come on.
I want to thank all of the panelists for their talks, but this one. Hello? Yeah, just wanted to ask, this is a really wonderful talk about Anuruddha's engagement. I mean, it's really fascinating, the idea that when you do a conservative shastric treatment of something, you might have a certain agenda and therefore sort of actually make a new program of practice. I mean, that's a very powerful idea to me, so thank you for bringing that out. But I wanted to ask the question, you talked about this, the Anapanasati part, and you didn't quite get a chance, I think, to really elaborate on it. But the question I'm asking is it, what distinguishes his treatment by putting it at the end like that and sort of tiering it and then making it much more about insight than, say, it maybe is in a more samatha-focused context? What do you think that does for his larger program and placing Anapanasati there? And what does it do to Anapanasati in your more general understanding of where Anapanasati fits in the larger Buddhist program? Do you get?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, so he's definitely highlighting the potential of Anapana as an insight practice. He refers it to the king of meditation objects, by which one can easily attain, both Lokya and Lokuttara goals. And then he goes on to really dwell on using this rubric of 8 different stages of development, the latter half of which all pertain to insight. He's really dwelling on the insight development of it. So it caps off that whole trajectory of the whole thing that he's woven into a progressive linear sequence with insight, and really highlights insight. Like Kayagata Sati for him also had to do with insight, but apparently less powerfully associated with it than Anapana. So yeah, and the fact that the Anapanasati 16 things are all related to an insight context. The last 4, or at least the last 3 tetrads, are very unambiguously related to vipassana. Related to an insight angle, whereas, for example, in the Visuddhimagga, only the last is considered necessarily related to insight. So he's really highlighting the insight potential of Anapana.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, Tinzi Devan, carry on.
Thank you, respected Chairperson and distinguished speakers for sharing with us a very profound knowledge.